Welcome to the Food Defense Awareness for the Intentional Adulteration Rule online course. This training will provide an overview of food defense and is divided into 3 modules. Module 1 will provide an overview of intentional adulteration and food defense. Module 2 will discuss implementation of food defense at a facility, and Module 3 will discuss roles and responsibilities. This Food Defense Awareness training is designed for individuals assigned to work at actionable process steps and their supervisors, and will meet the Food Defense Awareness training requirement 21 CFR 121.4b2 within the Mitigation Strategies to Protect Food Against Intentional Adulteration Rule, or IA Rule. After completing this course, you will be able to 1. Explain the importance of food defense, 2. Describe ways to protect food from intentional adulteration, 3. Recognize suspicious activity, and 4. Report suspicious activity.
Safe and healthy food is what most people expect. But what if someone wanted to make people sick through food on purpose? Since the events of September 11, 2001, and other incidents that followed, there has been growing concern about attacks that could take place on the food supply. This course will introduce you to food defense and also discuss food defense in the context of FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act rule. Mitigation Strategies to Protect Food Against Intentional Adulteration, 21 CFR Part 121, which is referred to as the IA Rule for short. Completing this training or a similar training on food defense awareness is required by this rule for all employees assigned to actionable process steps and their supervisors, and is a great step towards protecting food from intentional adulteration.
Module 1. Intentional Adulteration and Food Defense Overview. After completing this module, you will be able to 1. Explain intentional adulteration, 2. Explain food defense, 3. Distinguish food defense from food safety, and 4. Explain consequences of intentional adulteration. Why would someone want to make people sick on purpose? People or groups could be motivated to intentionally adulterate food for many reasons, ranging from a desire to incite fear and panic to causing illnesses and deaths. Intentional adulteration is the deliberate contamination of food with a biological, chemical, radiological, or physical agent, with the intent to cause wide-scale illnesses and deaths. Malicious individuals, including terrorists, may see intentional adulteration as an opportunity to hurt the public and gain notoriety to further their cause. Intentional adulteration is a criminal act that can have devastating consequences. That's why Congress mandated that FDA take steps to protect the public from intentional adulteration. FDA issued the IA rule, which says that covered food facilities must identify and protect their most vulnerable points against intentional adulteration. Food defense is the effort to protect food from acts of intentional adulteration intended to cause wide-scale public health harm. These efforts include measures to reduce or eliminate the possibility that an intentional adulteration event would occur. There are many measures that can be implemented for food defense purposes, but the IA rule requires covered food facilities to institute the most important food defense measures through the development and implementation of a food defense plan. Food defense plans contain many food defense measures, but begin with a vulnerability assessment to identify significant vulnerabilities at a point, step, or procedure. A point, step, or procedure is an activity related to manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding of a food product. The IA rule defines a significant vulnerability as a vulnerability that, if exploited, could reasonably be expected to cause wide-scale public health harm. A significant vulnerability is identified by a vulnerability assessment conducted by a qualified individual that includes consideration of the following: 1. Potential public health impact, severity and scale, if a contaminant were added, 2. Degree of physical access to the product, and 3. Ability of an attacker to successfully contaminate the product. The assessment must consider the possibility of an inside attacker. Points, steps, or procedures that are identified as having these significant vulnerabilities are called actionable process steps. The IA rule defines actionable process steps as a point, step, or procedure in a food process where a significant vulnerability exists and at which mitigation strategies can be applied and are essential to significantly minimize or prevent the significant vulnerability. After that, measures to reduce or prevent the significant vulnerability must be chosen and implemented. These are called mitigation strategies. More information about the Food Defense Plan, actionable process steps, and mitigation strategies will be discussed in the next module. It's important to note that you must be a qualified individual with specialized training or experience to develop the Food Defense Plan, conduct a vulnerability assessment, or choose appropriate mitigation strategies. A qualified individual is a person who has the education, training, or experience, or a combination thereof, necessary to perform an activity required under Subpart C of this part, as appropriate to the individual's assigned duties. A qualified individual may be, but is not required to be, an employee of the establishment.
How is food defense different from food safety? Food defense is similar to food safety in that both involve activities to minimize or prevent adulteration of the food supply. But there are also important differences between food safety and food defense. Food safety measures protect against unintentional adulteration that may be predictable based on previous food safety events. For instance, we know that eggs may be susceptible to unintentional salmonella contamination, so pasteurization steps and cooking suggestions are incorporated based on this anticipated hazard. Food defense is a little different. Food defense, in contrast, protects against contaminants intentionally introduced into the food, with the intent to cause harm. Intentional acts may be more difficult to anticipate. Food safety measures may not provide safeguards against an intentional contaminant. That's why food defense measures to prevent intentional adulteration are critical.
You may be wondering why food defense measures are important. In addition to wide-scale illnesses and deaths, intentional adulteration can also cause widespread public fear and undermine public confidence in our food supply. An attack on our food might force recalls and company closures, putting all their employees out of work. That would be really hard on our economy, but could also result in job loss, which could hurt your family. Unfortunately, intentional adulteration has already occurred. In December 2013, a contract employee at a food facility in Japan intentionally adulterated several frozen foods with a pesticide. Japanese authorities believe the assailant brought the chemical contaminant to the plant and added it to frozen foods during the manufacturing process. This intentional adulteration resulted in at least 2,843 foodborne illness reports and 6.4 million packages of various frozen foods recalled. The primary purpose of food defense is to prevent intentional adulteration. A successful intentional adulteration event can result in illnesses, deaths, and psychological and economic damage that can extend far beyond the point of adulteration. And that is why food defense is so very important.
Congratulations! You have now completed Module 1.
In this module, you learn to 1. Explain intentional adulteration. 2. Explain food defense. 3. Distinguish food defense from food safety. And 4. Explain consequences of intentional adulteration. Module 2. Implementation of food defense at a facility. After completing this module, you will be able to 1. Explain the importance of a food defense plan. 2. Describe actionable process steps. 3. Explain mitigation strategies. And 4. Recognize the importance of training. There are multiple points in the food supply chain where it is possible to intentionally contaminate food. The steps that are most vulnerable must be determined, and measures must be taken to protect those steps. While FDA encourages diligence in food defense at all stages of the farm-to-fork production chain, the IA rule specifically requires food defense measures at facilities. Covered food facilities must conduct vulnerability assessments to identify their most vulnerable points in the food production process. Remember from Module 1 that these points are referred to as actionable process steps. The assessment results in a list of actionable process steps where a significant vulnerability to intentional adulteration exists and where mitigation strategies must be applied. There are many different factors involved in both identifying actionable process steps and choosing appropriate mitigation strategies. Actionable process steps and mitigation strategies are facility-specific. Just like your facility is unique in its processes and setup, so are its actionable process steps and chosen mitigation strategies. Let's go through an example. During a vulnerability assessment, management noted this mixing step allowed unrestricted access to the mixer and a reasonable opportunity for an inside attacker to contaminate the food without detection. An inside attacker is someone who has legitimate access to the facility, for example, an employee, contractor, or visitor, and has a basic understanding of the facility's operation and the food being produced. It was also noted that if a successful intentional adulteration were to occur at this step, it could potentially lead to widespread illness or even death. Based on these conclusions, this step is considered an actionable process step. Mitigation strategies must now be identified and implemented to reduce or eliminate the vulnerabilities that have been identified at this step. Mitigation strategies are defined as risk-based, reasonably appropriate measures that a person knowledgeable about food defense would employ to significantly minimize or prevent significant vulnerabilities identified at actionable process steps, and that are consistent with the current scientific understanding of food defense at the time of the analysis. In this example, mitigation strategies that could be used to reduce this vulnerability are restricting the operation, cleaning, and maintenance of the mixer to authorized personnel only, maximizing the visibility of the mixing operation to allow a clear view of this step, or assigning operators in such a way that no one is alone while the mixer is in operation. The chosen mitigation strategies make sense for this example. Your facility may choose other reasonable mitigation strategies. The point is, the mitigation strategies are making it harder, or even impossible, for someone, including an inside attacker, to intentionally contaminate the food supply. The food defense plan is important because it contains the vulnerability assessment, the actionable process steps, and the mitigation strategies. It also contains procedures to ensure that the mitigation strategies are being properly implemented. Increasing awareness about food defense is another very important aspect of protection. Because of this, people assigned to actionable process steps and their supervisors are required to take food defense awareness training. The food defense plan is only valuable if people assigned to actionable process steps and their supervisors understand the importance of the plan and are aware of their responsibility to implement the mitigation strategies outlined in the plan. That means you. In addition to the food defense awareness training requirement, the IA rule further requires you to have proper training on the implementation of mitigation strategies at actionable process steps. Individuals working at these process steps, as well as their supervisors, must be qualified through education, training, or experience, or a combination thereof, to implement the mitigation strategy or combination of strategies at each actionable process step. This training may require facility-specific information for proper implementation of the mitigation strategy or strategies, and therefore will need to be developed and administered on the job. Congratulations! You have now completed Module 2. In this module, you learn to 1. Explain the importance of a food defense plan. 2. Describe actionable process step. 3. Explain mitigation strategies. And 4. Recognize the importance of training. After completing this module, you will be able to 1. Explain the various roles in food defense awareness. 2. Recognize your role in preventing intentional adulteration. 3. Give examples of suspicious activity. And 4. Report suspicious activities to the appropriate person. Responsibility for protecting food from intentional adulteration lies with regulators, industry, consumers, and especially you. Everyone plays a role in protecting food from intentional adulteration. Actively being aware and reporting suspicious behaviors will make it much harder for anyone to use the food supply to hurt others. Let's review roles and responsibilities in a bit more detail. In order to produce safe food for consumers, industry plays a leading role in protecting food from intentional adulteration. The role of the FDA and other regulators is to ensure that industry is complying with various rules and regulations for producing safe food. This includes conducting inspections to ensure that facilities are following their food defense plans.
Your role in food defense is extremely important. Because you're working at an actionable process step or supervising such an individual, you are required to take food defense awareness training and to ensure the proper implementation of the mitigation strategies at that step. There are many possible mitigation strategies that you may come across during your career, but here are a few examples. Locking the hatch to the silo if that's where you work, or using your identification card to access the restricted area where you work, or making sure that you have someone working with you at all times at your actionable process steps. Since mitigation strategies are put in place to significantly reduce the likelihood of a successful intentional adulteration, it is extremely important that they are implemented properly.
Think about it. You may have the most knowledge about your workstation. For example, if your job routinely involves preparation and staging of ingredients for processing, who is in a better position to notice that something suspicious may have occurred? Maybe one of the mitigation strategies at this step is that you must visually inspect the ingredients and their containers prior to use to ensure that the containers remain intact and the ingredient appearance is normal. Since you are the person doing these things on a regular basis, you play a critical role in recognizing when something appears wrong. If you see something unusual or suspicious, it is your responsibility to report the incident. Your role in protecting the food supply against intentional adulteration is important. Your attentiveness and vigilance are key to the success of the food defense plan. Let's look at food defense in action. Much of your facility's food defense plan relies on your awareness of your surroundings. Because you work at an actionable process step or supervise someone who does, you have the experience and knowledge to implement mitigation strategies. You are uniquely positioned to report when something is out of place or when someone is acting suspiciously. This could include suspicious individuals or suspicious activities. In some cases, a suspicious individual could be a colleague or employee. Any attempt to get around a mitigation strategy should raise a red flag in your mind. Unusual interest in accessing the food supply from or near your workstation should make you suspicious. Let's look at some other things that you should report. Do you pay attention to what's going on around you at work? Would you recognize suspicious activity? Here are some things to look out for. If you see these things, you should report them. As the old saying goes, better safe than sorry.
Unsecured areas. Unsecured areas, such as a door to a restricted area, is found propped open when it is supposed to be locked, may allow unauthorized access to that area, or could indicate that someone without proper access has entered. You should be aware of secure areas and notify management if you see that access restrictions are not being followed. Unescorted visitors. In many facilities, visitors require escorts and often have some type of visitor identification. An unescorted visitor without identification may wander into restricted areas and could gain access to adulterate food. You should be aware of who is in your work area, and visitors should be accompanied by someone with authority to escort them. Unusual behavior. Suspicious activities may include an employee or another individual being in an area where they don't belong, acting anxiously, bringing prohibited personal items into the processing area, or handling and opening containers in a suspicious way. An inside attacker, A person who has legitimate access to the food facility and some process steps is one of the most difficult attacks to prevent. In your work area, be aware of unusual behavior and let your management know if you see someone acting suspiciously. Abnormal changes. Abnormal changes in the work area, such as to the equipment, materials, sanitation, ingredients, and products, may be indicative of an act of intentional adulteration. Boxes or supplies may be in the wrong place, keys or locks may be missing, equipment may appear dirty, or ingredients and products may not be sealed in their respective containers. When possible, you should examine the materials you use for any discoloration, changes in texture, rips, tears, or other breaches. Don't assume a broken bag or seal was a simple accident. Instead, bring it to the attention of your supervisor or designated member of management. You should examine your work area, equipment, ingredients, and products for any abnormal changes, and bring this to the attention of your supervisor or designated member of management.
Because every facility is unique, the situations that spark your food defense knowledge will also be unique. These were but a few suspicious situations in which your vigilance and awareness of food defense measures can help prevent a disaster. These situations should immediately prompt your reporting procedures. Find out today what the reporting procedures are at your facility and identify the individual that you would need to inform about a potential suspicious situation. Congratulations! You have now completed Module 3. In this module, you learn to 1. Explain the various roles in food defense awareness. 2. Recognize your position responsibilities in intentional adulteration. 3. Give examples of suspicious activity. And 4. Report suspicious activities to the appropriate person. Congratulations! You have now completed this course. In this course, you learn to 1. Explain the importance of food defense. 2. Describe ways to protect food from intentional adulteration. 3. Recognize suspicious activity. 4. Report suspicious activity. Most importantly, you've learned how vital you are in protecting food from acts intended to cause wide-scale public health harm. As the eyes and ears at actionable process steps, your vigilance may be the food supply's first line of defense.